Hello, listeners. Welcome and thank you for joining me again on today's episode of the Leading with Integrity podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about all things leadership. We're also going to be paying special attention to how managers and leaders can help their people adapt post-COVID with what hybrid working looks like, how to best manage it, and how to really help people through that process. I'm joined by guest Helen Tuddenham, who is a leadership coach who helps professionals with their leadership journey through executive coaching and leadership development. I'll let Helen tell you a bit more about her background in a minute, but it's a very impressive career working for one of the big four consulting houses, among other things. So it's a slightly different topic again today, and I hope you'll find it useful, relevant, and interesting. This is Leading with Integrity Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK, so trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Helen, thank you for joining me this afternoon.
No worries. Nice to see you, David.
Yeah, likewise. And today we're going to be talking about everything that you do. We're going to talk about leadership, a bit about hybrid working, change management, all those challenges that are all tied together, aren't they? But I think to start with, I'm going to hand over the virtual microphone to you to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, what you do today, what gets you out of bed.
I'm an executive coach and a leadership development consultant, and I help legal and finance professionals overcome the challenges of senior leadership. And in terms of what that means, well, I work with them either one-to-one, or if it's leadership development, it'll be with a group of people. They unravel their confusing thoughts. They think about what it is that's holding them back. And when they've done that, they've worked out what success means for them. They've got more clarity, and they've just got a fuller understanding of who they are as people. And that in turn then gives them renewed enthusiasm for their work and helps them to grow in their role, but also beyond their role as well. And I've been doing that for about 3 years. And before that, I was a director at PwC, the consulting firm in London. I was there for nearly 25 years, so I did quite a lot of different things there. But when I left, I was director in charge of the people risk team. And essentially what that meant is that I was working with clients, helping them to improve their capabilities and their culture within their teams, mainly in sort of the finance, risk and compliance space. So that's me.
3 years, I didn't realise that. It's so about the same time as I've been doing it on my own. Did you have the same kind of challenges that I did with setting up a business, like literally right before COVID?
I did. So I left my job in February 2020, and at the time I think I thought COVID was going to stay in China, which perhaps many of us did. I had gone down to 4 days a week from the December 2019, because I had been thinking about going on my own for a while. So I had done a lot of coaching informally. I used to do a lot with sort of middle managers, trying to get them up to senior manager, and also doing interview panels for that. And did a little bit of coaching internally on the side, but I found I enjoyed that a lot more than a lot I was doing day to day. As you can imagine, when you get to be quite senior in a big organisation, a lot of what you're doing is putting out fires, arguing over resources, that kind of thing. So not the kind of things that I went into the job in the first place. So yes, it was interesting. I'm very grateful for my network. We might come back to networks a bit later on. So that I was able to get some work online when we were completely in lockdown mode. It probably took me about 18 months to really get going. And I don't know if that was because of the pandemic or because it just takes any small business about 18 months to get going.
Yeah, I often wonder that myself, actually. I joke that, the business has been going for 3 years, but with the COVID of it all, really, I feel like I'm only 6 months in sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a funny old time, wasn't it? The experiences of those last few years, it's really shown us how much more crucial effective leadership has become during kind of ambiguous and challenging and changing times. So what advice could you offer to help managers better lead through those kinds of challenges?
I would say, in one word, it's communication. So I actually was coaching someone yesterday who's with a different one of the big four, and we were talking about this because the general conversation was about his leadership style and how he could achieve it more consistently, but he kept mentioning the word clarity. And so I said to him, I've reflected back, you've mentioned this word quite a bit, what do you mean? And we had this discussion actually around clarity is quite rare to get these days, just because of the sort of fast-paced environment that we're working in, that kind of thing. And the ambiguity, even if you are not deliberately going through some kind of change program, which most organizations are anyway, just the amount of ambiguity in the working environment, political, external environment, just can make things like decision making quite difficult at times. And so we were just talking about, well, what kind of clarity could he get? And the general view was, well, you could get clarity on the overall direction that he wants to go in and he wants to send his team in, but a bit less on the detail. So when we can't get all the answers that we want and our team are unable to get all the answers that they need as well, what we can do is just communicate what we do know and do that really clearly, but then be honest about that we just don't have all the answers. And there is a little bit of watching the space, but then keep checking in and having that regular communication so that people don't think that you've just forgotten about them. And that communication can work two ways as well. In fact, should work two ways. So giving the people in your team or organization an opportunity to be able to feed things back to you in a way where you're really listening, even if you don't have the answers, but just listening and understanding where they're coming from. People don't deal with change very well when they feel that the change is being done to them. But if they feel that they're part of the change and they can influence it in some way, that can really help with the buy-in. So if there's any opportunities for people to get involved, if you're doing some kind of deliberate change, that's good. And the other thing I would say, I was in a leadership program a few months ago, and we talked quite a bit around anchors. So when everything is changing around you, what are your anchors that do remain consistent that you can hold on to? And for a lot of people, that will be things outside of work. So it might be friends, family, hobbies. But for a lot of people, there will be things inside of work as well. So it could be the people that you work closely with. It could be you as their team leader. So giving people the opportunity to connect with others can be really helpful as well. Oh, and don't have one more. Don't let the ambiguity put you off making a decision. There's probably no such thing as the perfect decision to make, but there will be a range of things that are pretty good decisions in the circumstances. So as long as it's something that's going in that overall direction that we talked about, even if you have no more clarity, most decisions can be unraveled a little bit or course corrected if you get different information at a later date.
Yeah, I like that last one in particular. You can't let lack of information or lack of perfect information stop you from taking action. And just understand that if new information comes to light, you can change that decision, can't you? It's not fixed in stone. It reminds me of someone I used to work with, and he was very funny in a lot of ways, because one of his buzz phrases was that perfect was the enemy of the good.
Yes.
And he'd always throw that out, and I agree with that statement. Like, it's true. Then at the same time, he was the worst person for waiting for absolutely every piece of information before he'd make a decision. So he wasn't practicing what he preached, but it made me laugh at the time.
Yeah, I've started using the word experiment in coaching quite a lot, actually, because I think if you frame it as an experiment, then it just feels a little bit less scary. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like the scientific method, isn't it? It's you do what you can with the data you have until you have more data or not, and just accept that you've made the best decision possible. No such thing as perfect, is there?
Exactly.
Anyway, so on the subject then again of the last few years, one of the big, huge changes, of course, has been this rise of, first it was remote working by necessity, and then it's sort of transitioned a second time into hybrid working as we've kind of emerged from these lockdowns and restrictions, all that. I mean, that feels a bit like old news now. Do you think this hybrid thing is here to stay? Do you think we're going to go back to full offices again in the future, or?
I definitely think it's here to stay. It's interesting. We have, it's not new, as you say. We've been doing it for probably about 18 months, most places. I'm not sure if we've got it right yet. So there is something there for leaders, I think, to sort of take a step back and review it and thinking what's working and what's not. And, and again, with that communication point, getting the views of your team members there. But I do think it will stay. It might change a little bit. I think most people I speak to are sort of in the office 2 to 3 days a week. I think there is a little bit more of a trend to it to go 3. I can't see it ever being 4, maybe for some organisations, but certainly not mandating everyone to go back into the office. I think most senior leaders do want people in the office a bit more, but I think that is just something around the need to control big organisations in particular. And I think people think that the best way of controlling people is where we can see them. And I also think nothing to do with, with what people listening to this can influence at all, but I think there's something around infrastructure, and particularly around some of the big cities and my experiences in the UK, just working a bit better. So having more flexible transport arrangements, having physical offices that are better suited to hybrid working. What I mean by that, I was somewhere last week where in a bid to try and get people into the office on Fridays and Mondays, because no one's in, and they're offering 75% discount on their coffee and just fresh food in the staff canteen. And someone was telling me, well, that's great, I'd save about £5, but my ticket into London in this case would cost me 20. So why would I want to do that? So there is something about incentivizing people, but with something that really matters to them.
That's interesting about incentivizing them. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. I think there's so much contained in such a relatively small word that is hybrid, isn't there? I mean, it's more than just work from home versus work from the office. It's when you're at the office, how does the office work? What's the design, the architecture of the building looking like? How are desks distributed? Where do people sit? All of these things. And it's part of, I guess, reflecting people's lifestyles, like the times they want to work, whether it's from home, whether it's from the local coffee shop, all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, what do you think the good would look like?
I just say that's interesting, because I'm thinking we had flexible working before, so I only used to be in the office 3 or 4 days a week before COVID, if I'm being honest, and we just called it flexible working. So as you're talking, I'm thinking, why did we come up with that word, hybrid? Maybe it's because some people are different places, but they were last time. So I think what I have seen well is where organisations have mandated as much as you can ever mandate anything specific days. So there are days when might not be the whole organisation, but the whole team is expected to be in the office. And then other than that, you can do whatever you want. And that could be once a week or once a fortnight. What they've then done is made sure that the time in the office is used for the right things. So if you think about where hybrid doesn't work, it tends to be a lack of trust, particularly where people have joined the organisation the last 2 or 3 years. And the last 2 or 3 years has given rise to quite a lot of churn in some teams. There was some research I read that was talking about social friction. And what that's saying is that because there's a lack of trust, just because people feel they don't know each other very well, and people are reluctant to ask for help. And that could be direct reports who are struggling and looking to their line manager for help, or it could just be getting help from peers on a particular project or to pick people's brains. So they either don't know who to speak to, or if they do, they're just a little bit worried because they don't know them so well and how they would react. So those days where everyone is in the office, if you can use that for connections, and that might be about having team meetings, but it's not having team meetings to then show a PowerPoint presentation about the quarterly results, which you can just email. It's about getting people to know each other better and just accept the fact that on those Wednesdays or whatever it is, there might not be a lot of work done because people are busy having those, ad hoc conversations that will help with, productivity and innovation and growth to your business in the future. And there are ways you can do that online as well. So you can, I've known places that randomly pair people up and just say, get together for 30 minutes online with coffee and just share your wins of the week or your success stories or some projects that you're working on at the moment.
It's funny, isn't it? There's people there in the workplace now who have never physically sat in the same room as people they work with.
Yeah.
It's like the COVID generation of kids who never went to school for 2 years. I wonder if that's your first job and that's your only experience in the workplace, I really wonder what that must be like. I can't answer that, I suspect.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think most organisations are better at saying, okay, I was working at one earlier in the year where they're like, if you're a new graduate or a new joiner, you have to be in 5 days a week for the first 2 months, or at least 4 days a week, and are being quite strict about it because of that learning. I think they used to call it sitting with Nelly many years ago. So learning from being alongside of people. What you need to make sure then, though, is that you've got enough of your senior staff in, so they've got actually someone to observe and learn from. So I think I've seen that work well. I've also heard of what I think people are getting used to still, and I'm one of these, is very big. So I do a lot of leadership development events. I was at one at the end of last year that had 150 people. And I'm not particularly COVID cautious, but I felt a little bit weird, actually, just because I'd never been with so many people in one room that had quite a low ceiling. So it was quite noisy. And then someone else who's at a different organisation, they'd had a similar conference just before Christmas, and it was for their first 3 years of pre-qualified accountants, and they were saying that people were finding it quite difficult. So even if you're able to manage in a 4 or 5 people in an office somewhere, when you get big groups of people together, there is still some nervousness there.
Yeah, not in a work context, but I went to the Star Wars celebration in London a couple of months back, and I had that exact same experience. I mean, I wouldn't say I've not been COVID cautious, but that was certainly the first big event I'd been to since the pandemic, and they overbooked it as well. And it was quite unsettling for a little while when you're queuing up for 2 hours to get in and you're just literally in this giant warehouse full of people and nobody was wearing a mask. And you're just sitting there thinking, is this not the best idea? Yeah.
And before COVID, you might find yourself having conversations with the people in the queue, or, at this conference I was at, we had to queue up for our lunch. Whereas I think some of that has gone a little bit, so that just striking up conversations with near strangers, because I think what automatically the phone comes out and we're either checking our emails because we're really busy or because we're a little bit nervous about social situations, or there might also be something around, I was thinking about my children in particular, that generation has just grown up with a smartphone in their hand anyway, and so then that's what they naturally turn to if they're not feeling super confident.
Yeah, we see a few things, the social media posts, a few of the headlines kind of bemoaning the loss of that social connection and the interaction and how vital that is for the workplace. And yeah, I can see that. And I do think face-to-face interaction is difficult to replace. But then I also think this is still a face-to-face interaction, isn't it? It's just we're doing it remotely. So it's just a different method of achieving the same thing, I think. But Maybe I'm biased.
I think I most of my coaching is still online, which is something I was surprised at when we sort of came out of the end of COVID. Even people who live quite near me, and I think it's just the convenience of it. Certainly one-to-one. One-to-many is a bit trickier, so I'm glad most of my more leadership development work is face-to-face. But yeah, certainly one-to-one, I think you can have a really good connection online.
It makes me think as well about how you build an organizational culture virtually. And again, it's the similar things, isn't it? It's all those little interactions, the touch points, the feeling like you're being enveloped, you're becoming part of an organization. And that is extremely difficult to do digitally.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have a term when I was doing culture work around moments that matter. So culture is massive. So you would normally kind of focus on a particular area. So if you were thinking about new joiners and how you induct new joiners, it would be, well, what are the moments that matter for them? And that might be the first day at work, getting their offer letter. And it's trying to focus on those things, take the culture that you want and the values that underpin that, and think, if care, for example, was one of your values as an organisation, what would care like when I'm writing a letter to say, congratulations, you have, you've got a job with us and we'd like you to start on this date. What would care look like when it's your first day in the office? And that might be having a buddy. It might mean having a pass ready and waiting for you, so you're not feeling a little bit awkward in front of security, that kind of thing.
What would be your top tips then for leaders to better handle that hybrid dynamic and make sure that all their people get the most out of it and they don't feel isolated?
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast, not podcast, it was like a webinar thing about this last week actually, and there was a really good phrase that I can't take credit for it, but they were talking about the dangers of micromanaging, and she was talking about the difference between checking in on someone and checking up on someone. And I just really like the way she phrased it, because I think there is something around, if we're not seeing people, we want to make sure they're getting on okay, and that's fine with that. And that's sort of checking in on someone. But checking up on someone is comes from a place of we're assuming that they're not doing what they're supposed to. And so both of those things might involve, a weekly catch-up or a daily catch-up, but just think about what's the purpose of that, and what are the questions that you are going to ask, so that you're coming from a place of trust and of curiosity, wanting to hear from the other person first. I think that we probably are doing a little bit of micromanaging at the moment. I think to some extent we had to in the pandemic, just because it was such a crazy time and a lot of people hadn't been used to working from home. We knew that people's home lives might not necessarily be going very well either. They might be driven with homeschool or people who are sick. And there was a need probably for more frequent touch points. It's once you get into that habit, it's quite easy to stay in that habit. So I think now there's something about what's the complexity of the task this person is doing, what's their level of experience, and therefore what's the right amount of management for them. And you only really know that by having an open conversation at the beginning about asking them whether they're comfortable with their work, what experience they've done, that kind of thing, particularly if it's a new team member.
The level of experience, I think, is key. I think taking that one-size-fits-all approach to this sort of thing is where most of those micromanagers go wrong. And micromanagement, I think, is one of my pet peeves, always has been. But I feel like it's something that didn't necessarily get worse or more prevalent because of the pandemic. It just became different. So you read some of these things like about employers installing monitoring software on people's laptops and that kind of thing. That's definitely checking on people, not
definitely
checking up on people, not checking in with them. I think that's it, isn't it? It's anything where you're creating that impression of looming over someone's shoulder versus just asking how they are and having a conversation.
It's about empowering. So there's always a mix of sort of supporting someone and giving them autonomy, and trying to get the balance right there is really tricky unless you know the individuals in your team well, which I guess is one of the first things that we should be doing as leaders.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's part of a leader's job, actually. You're never going to know how best to manage an individual if you don't know anything about them, are you? So all of this really leads quite nicely into the next question, I think, which is how do you think the role of the manager has changed in this, let's call it jokingly, new world? Or maybe it's not much of a joke, actually.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people still struggling post-pandemic. And I think it's also more acceptable now to say that you're struggling. Maybe there was just as many people struggling before, they just didn't feel they could say it. So I feel now it's talked about a little bit more. My friends who work in large organisations will anecdotally tell me that people possibly make excuses that they did before. So whereas there was always a bit of a, I've got a cold, but I'm still going to come in and give my all today. There's a little bit more. I've got a cold. I think I'll just have a duvet day. So there's a lot more genuine struggle with people, and a lot more perhaps people who have been a little less productive than they could be, and sometimes there's good reasons behind that. I was had lunch with a friend who's just got a new job, and out of her 8 direct reports, 5 of them have got some kind of health issue. Most of them mental health, but not all of them, which means that they're not able to work full time, or at least full time productively at the moment. Her boss, however, is still expecting her team to still, meet her KPIs and be as productive as they were before. So there's something around how you manage that balance between, care and support, because we do want to do that, but whilst also making sure that your team is productive and hitting its targets and doing good work. And I think I would just come back to what we've just been saying, actually, which is just know your team as individuals. So how is it that they work best? What is it they need, either from you or the organisation as a whole, that's going to help them work the best that they can at the moment? There's also something about when you're delegating tasks or setting tasks, just being really clear on what it is that needs to be done and when it needs to be done by. And if they can't do that for whatever reason, then coming up with some kind of, negotiation, something that you're both happy with. I think there's something around fitting that piece of work into the bigger picture. So if they're unable to do that, what implications will that have for someone else in the team or the client or the organisation? And so putting in a little bit of plan B. So if you can't meet the deadline, can you give me a couple of days notice, that kind of thing. And if that does happen, then rather than you as a leader just take on that work, which a lot of my clients, because they're very supportive and want to be seen as nice people, they tend to take on work back that they've delegated. So instead of doing that, trying to work with your team member to think, okay, what if you're not going to be able to get that done now because your conditions flared up again or whatever, what alternatives have we got? And trying to help them shape part of that solution, because that in itself is empowering and helps them feel they've not let anyone down because they're unable to do it anymore. And it gives them a bit more autonomy, helps them feel a little bit more stronger to some extent. And then the last thing I'd say is, don't forget that you're not on your own. So you have an HR department, most larger organisations will tend to have some sort of occupational health department. So use the experts around you to help make sure you have good quality conversations with your people.
Do you think the narrative has sort of changed as well? You mentioned about the sick leave thing. So, from my early career, it was always, even if you just had a cold, you would be expected to come into the office. If you had a stomach thing, don't care, come to work, you can still work. You don't need your stomach to type, that sort of silly responses. Do you think that's flipped a bit on its head now? Do you think managers now are a bit more understanding about illness? They're more willing to, just say, yeah, look, you're ill, you're not working. Another one of my pet peeves, I have to say, you're sick, it's contagious, come to work anyway.
Before the pandemic, there used to be a not very good compromise that I used to see a lot, which was, and actually it wasn't coming from the managers, it was coming from the individuals themselves, which was, I'm not feeling very well, so I'm going to work from home. And sometimes that worked fine, because if say you had COVID, but you had a very mild version of COVID, you probably could do a bit of a 9 to 5 of, maybe not real brain powered work, but you could do a sort of a 9 to 5 maybe some of the simple tasks on your list, but you definitely would not want to be in the office, and you certainly wouldn't allowed to be in the office. I think that became the default to some extent. So a lot of people who really were not well would say, oh, no, I'll work from home. And then I would be occasionally having phone calls with them. We did have Google Meet where I work, but nobody ever put their screen on before the pandemic. So we'd be having, phone calls and stuff. And I knew they were not well enough to work, whether it was at home or otherwise. So I think not coming to the office but being at home is still an option. But as a leader, I would always be checking, if work at home was not an option, do you think you would be in the office or not? Would you be well enough to come in the office? And if they say probably not, then just get them to think really about whether they should be in. And certainly don't put pressure on people. If it's an ongoing issue, then it's probably something to speak to HR about, or ask what is it that would help you.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's been a while, but I like to think I was the same. For me, it was always a question of trust. So if someone tells you they're too ill to work, I would take that at face value until I have evidence to the contrary. But I'm certainly not going to go looking for that evidence either. Like, if you tell me, you say, I trust you, right? I'm not going to make you work if you're unwell. Because, I mean, apart from anything else, even if it's a minor illness thing, you could be prolonging it by expecting them to still work from home, when what they really need to do is focus on getting better. And if you let them do that, in my experience, maybe 8 times out of 10, they'll be back at work quicker anyway. So everyone's a winner then.
Organisations are outcomes-based, aren't they? So if the work, it's not so much how many hours you're putting in, it's are you doing the tasks assigned to you, and are you doing them to, a good enough level? And if that's not the case, then you need to start having those conversations early with people. But coming to those conversations from a position of curiosity almost. My first thing isn't to have a go at you for not doing your work on time. It's to find out how you are, if there's anything going on, how you feel you're performing at the moment. And certainly don't leave it till the year-end performance management process. It's making people feel supported if they're struggling.
Yeah, it's what you were saying earlier about checking in with people versus checking up on people, isn't it? And it applies just the same here. And I think the other thing you're talking about with the mental health side of it as well, you've got to be so much more careful with that, because if you do that kind of check in the wrong way when they're already signed off for a mental health thing, you could make that worse if you do it the wrong way.
Yeah, definitely. So, and if people are signed off, then I think there are particular rules that either have to follow or should follow. So that's when you definitely need to speak to occupational health. If people are off sick for whatever reason, whether it's physical or mental, then just leave them. It might, if you know them well, you could send a text just saying, hope you're feeling better, let me know if there's anything I can do to help, or, anything that someone needs to pick up for you. But yes, don't be hassling people off sick.
Yeah, not quite what I meant, but yes, that too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to some of the questions then a bit more specifically about leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much what we've been talking about anyway. But so my first question on this one is, what has been your own best experience of being led? That's
a really hard question. And if I say that, you might think I've not had many good experiences of being led. And that's not the case. Because I worked in a consulting firm, it was a matrix. So I did have a line manager, but actually every job I was on, I was probably working for someone different. So I've had lots of different people that I have been working for in my time. And I think when I was more junior, it was about somebody who would take the time to sit down and coach me through what I was doing, rather than just tell me, this is what needs to be done and look at last year's file. But actually somebody took time to coach me, to talk about the wider context of the piece of work. And yes, that does take more time, which is one of the issues I think leaders have with delegation, or effective delegation coaching, is it does take longer. I think as I've been more senior, it's people who've had my back, really. So there's been a couple of times where there's been an issue with a client, and the either the partner I was working for, or if I was the more senior person, then my line manager would be there for support. And that's not to say that if I've made a mistake, I get away with it. I learn from that. And, there probably are some kind of consequences. But it's the fact that, A, it's not kind of dwelt on, so it doesn't keep being brought up. But actually, they're there for the advice in terms of how do I unravel this mistake. And if it's appropriate, they might have a quick word with the client as well. So, so people have had my back, really.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, you've hit two of the primary things of being a leader and the responsibilities of that job. It's you've got to look after your people, firstly, which you've said. And then this whole piece around giving people the context for what they're doing. I don't know what it's like in big corporates because I've not worked in any, but certainly in a couple of the small businesses I've worked in, there was this very deliberate siloing of information and this kind of almost artificial secrecy about what's going on in the wider business. It's like, no, this narrow bit is your job. I want you to do that task. I'm not going to tell you why, what for, what the impact of it will be if you get it right or wrong. Just go away and do it because that's what I've told you to do. But actually, you're missing a huge trick there because if you explain all of those things to this person, you're going to get a buy-in a lot easier. And once you've got that, they're going to work harder to do a good job for you. And ultimately, you'll get a better result as well. So, and it makes them feel better as a person and more seen and heard and recognised for what they're contributing. So I think that's
learning.
Well, exactly, yeah.
It helps with learning as well, because if you're then able to apply what you've learned to different contexts rather than only because you get told what to do, you can only really apply it in that particular context.
And it's also great for building innovation and creative thinking, because if they understand what the wider problem is that's trying to be solved, they might have knowledge or skills that you don't, and they might be able to look at that problem and go, well, there's an easier and quicker solution and it will give you a better answer. I'm going to do that instead.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what you should want as a leader, in my opinion. Okay, so the opposite question then, I guess, which is, what's the biggest mistake you think a leader or manager can make?
I think we've probably covered it already, actually. I think it's that making assumptions about the person in front of you. So either that they can't be trusted, or that we're just assuming that because they look a certain way, or they're a particular age, or they've just joined the organisation, that they may know this, but they won't know that. So I think we've talked around it, but I don't think we've used the phrase situational leadership, where leadership needs to be flexed depending on the situation. But you can only make the right choice in situational leadership if you're clear on the task and the complexity in the situation, and you're also clear about the person in front of you, what their strengths are, what their development areas are, their knowledge, their skills, their expertise, their experience. And you only know that by getting to know the people in your team. And it's probably easy for me to say that because I'm quite an extrovert. I like just chatting to people about anything and everything. I know that not everyone is as comfortable in that space, and particularly talking about things outside of work. And so if that is you, I would just encourage you to be a little bit braver and have conversations. It might, going back to our hybrid point, it might be online, it might be in person, and just about them and what they enjoy doing. If it's someone new, find out what they did before. Even if it's a new graduate, you don't know what they did at university, what they feel confident in, what they feel less confident in, and then just setting the kind of expectations up front, I guess, around making sure the person's really clear on their expectations of what you're looking for from them, and just agreeing what so monitoring sounds like an awful word, but what that monitoring process is, because you don't want to be micromanaging, but you also don't want that person to be left kind of floundering, not knowing what they're doing and not feeling they can come to you for help.
Yeah, I like the word measuring rather than monitoring.
Thank you.
I guess it's that conversation, as you say, it's understanding in both directions, really, is what needs to be measured and how is it best going to be measured. And I think that's...
What does good look like? Because you can say to someone, I'd like you to do this report or whatever, which sounds easy, but actually there's a lot of, what do you want in the report? When does the report need to be done by? It's what does good look like that I don't think, I'll probably, hold my own hand up here, are particularly good at talking about. Possibly sometimes we don't know ourselves what good looks like. But.
Yeah, I'm probably the opposite. I tend to go too far. I want this nth level of detail of every. Yeah, anyway.
Are you a blue?
Yeah, possibly. It's the project manager in me, I fear. But yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, the point about introverts versus extroverts is interesting as well. I think not all introverts are created equal, are they? But I think and speaking as a semi-introvert myself, I think where we excel in those situations is we're better able to listen.
Yes.
On the whole. I mean, that's a horrible generalization, I think. And that's what I think serves you best in those situations, is being able to take the information in rather than transmit all the time. And I think that's where a lot of leaders trip over themselves.
Yeah. Another great phrase I like is that we should listen to understand rather than listen to respond. Because I think a lot of the time we're listening, but we're thinking, how do I respond to that person that makes me look either kind or clever or whatever it is that we want our identity to be.
No, I like that one. This idea of active listening as well.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, some people almost treat conversations like a competition, don't they? They're just waiting for their turn at bat or whatever. But actually, and they don't really take the information in when they do that. So I think you're right. It's listening to understand and then respond, but do so meaningfully, not just it's my turn, I'm going to say something.
Yeah. And respond in a way that's going to help the other person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next question then. A bit more about you, actually. What's the best thing about what you do? What is it that you love? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
So I think it's just seeing that difference in people. And I think on one level, a lot of it is confidence. I mean, people tend to come to me because they are lacking in confidence in some way or other. And some of them are operating at, pretty high levels. But every time we go up a ladder or we do something new, we start from a place with lower confidence. And that's not imposter syndrome. That's just normal because it's just unfamiliar to us. It's a new situation. And so seeing people improving confidence gets me out of bed in the morning. And that is shown in a lot of different ways because confidence is different for every person. That's why I particularly like coaching and doing some of the longer leadership programs where I see people over, 6 to 8 months, because you can really see that difference. So I actually been doing a leadership development program which finished last week, and to be able to see people who were looked really uncomfortable back in October when we started, who were not quite sure in their role how they could handle their line manager, who were not quite sure about the value that they could add and weren't particularly comfortable about their strengths. And then to see them last week where they were presenting in quite a big group, they had some sort of actors in who were getting to go out their comfort zone and actually feeling quite comfortable doing that, being a lot more assertive. That's brilliant. I think also where there is a tangible outcome to that, that's another thing that sort of really gets me excited about coaching. So that might be something really obvious, like a promotion or a new job. I think one of the clients I've been proudest of recently was actually someone who just did not get on with their line manager. And that was the biggest thing that was spoiling her enjoyment at work, actually, and actually making her want to leave what otherwise would be quite a good job. And so that's when we were coaching, that's what we were working on. So how to reframe the situation with her line manager in a way that they might not be best friends, but they can have a really good working relationship together. Essentially, they were just two really different personalities. But working through that gave her a lot more confidence because it made her feel it's not me, it's just a bit of a personality clash. But also knowing that she could, I suppose it's a bit like growth mindset, knowing that wasn't a situation that had to stay the same, that there were things that she could do to help make that a much better relationship, made her just feel more confident generally as a leader.
Yeah, not much I can say to that, really, but it sounds amazing. I'm really pleased that you're able to give such great results to your clients. It's awesome. Almost last question.
Okay.
I like this one. If you could go back in time, let's assume time travel has been invented, I wish. What career advice would you give to your younger self?
So I find that quite an easy one.
Oh.
And when I've done sort of mentoring programs in schools, particularly young women or girls at schools and students, this is what I always say, and that is shout about what you're doing. So I think I was always sort of brought up, maybe it's the British schooling system that does this to you, that if you do a really good job, you will get noticed, you'll get promoted, you'll get good ratings and that kind of thing. And that's only half of it. And possibly even the least important bit half of it. You need to do a good job, but then you need to make sure that everyone knows that you're doing a good job. And that's something that a lot of people shy away from, possibly more women than men, I don't know. Because they feel like they're boasting, it makes them feel like they want to be the centre of attention. But so you need to do it in a way that feels comfortable to you. So that might just be, you know, if you are having some kind of team meeting, just talking about your successes and your wins. One thing I used to like to do was if I'd done something really well on a project or the team had, I would think, okay, which of the other partners in my organisation have clients that this might be helpful for? And I would just knock on the door in a day when I was in the office, which I recognise is hard enough, stick my head around their office and just sort of say, oh, you know, I've just been doing this with this client. And it made me think about your client because I know they're going through the same things or in the same industry. Do you think they'd be interested? And it might be, I've got 5 minutes, sit down. It might be, can you put some time in the diary? Either way, it was fine. But I needed to know them a little bit to be able to do that. So if we did have big meetings, department meetings, I would just make sure I chatted to people. I would sometimes ask other people to introduce me to them, that kind of thing. So it's about being visible, and you can't do it to everyone because it takes up a lot of your time. So there's something about thinking, who are the 3 or 4 people that I want them to know me and know what I do and be advocates for me, depending on my career aspirations, and just start working a little bit on that.
I think it is a British thing, you know.
Possibly. I worked for a British-based company, but we did have quite a lot of people from overseas.
Yeah.
And I won't tell you the countries that were more direct than others.
Yeah.
But it possibly is. I think sometimes we're actually okay with it. We just don't know that it matters.
Yeah. I think thinking back to you mentioned the schooling system, and you're right. I mean, we were always taught no one likes to show off.
Yeah.
And so we've got that idea planted in the back of our heads, haven't we? And I'm sure there are national schooling systems in other countries that don't teach that way.
Yeah. But I knew at school, if I did a piece of work, I know the teacher had to mark it.
Mm.
So, if a teacher had 30 people in the class, whatever, they would know how good I was because they would have to look at everything I do. And particularly in the kind of organisation I worked with, which was a matrix organisation, my line manager, I very rarely worked with my line manager. So I would work for 5 or 6 different people over the course of the year, some of which were a completely different part of the organisation. And I had to make sure that they were all advocating for me. And it was particularly important when I went for director promotion. That was, I had to have written advocacy statements from people. But even to get into that promotion process, people had to be talking about me in a positive way.
I mean, the whole self-promotion thing, it's a double-edged sword sometimes, isn't it? I think it means different things to different people as well. I think a lot of people equate it to the worst kind of office politics and the kind of look at me mentality. But then the way you've explained it from your experience, it's a necessity, isn't it? So yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know what side of the fence I'm on with that one, to be honest.
I wrote a blog a couple of years ago, which was how to self-promote without losing self-respect. And that was the kind of thing I talked about there, sort of in terms of just doing it in little ways and speaking to people, not in terms of, I'm just going to tell you about this, actually phrasing it in a way that makes it look like you're trying to help the other person, or in my case, it was that other person's client. And sometimes it was, sometimes I would have more formal opportunities where we were, there's like, who's had a success this week type thing. A lot of people get around it a little bit by talking about we and the team quite a lot, and that's fine if it makes you feel less self-conscious, but you still need to say what your contribution was. Otherwise, it's less about you and more about the team.
Yes, it's an interesting one. I don't know. I'm trying to think back to how I did it when I was manager, and to be honest, I think I never, certainly not within the organisation, I would never have gone out and said, "Look what I've done." It was always, "Look what the team's done."
Yeah.
And that's always been my preferred approach, and I do think that is important as well. Yeah, something for me to think about.
Yeah, it's look what the team's done, and it might be something as simple as, and I'm really glad that I made sure we had the client on board right from the beginning, because we then won their trust really easily. Something as simple as that. It's probably more of an issue in bigger organisations as well, I have to say. So in a smaller organisation, you only work for the same person and they only have 3 or 4 direct reports. It might be less of an issue.
I don't know. I think the office politics bit becomes more at the fore in a smaller organisation. There's less of the grey for you to hide in and be absorbed by.
Office politics is a subject for a whole new podcast.
Oh, isn't it? Isn't it just? Yeah, I don't know if I've got the time to cover that in real detail, or the inclination, if I'm honest. Anyway, no, I'm gonna find that blog though, because that sounds like it's hit the nail on the head with the problem that we're talking about there.
Yeah, I can send you a link actually.
Yeah, please do.
Leadership Heroes.
We're almost out of questions. Last question. Another one of my favourite questions, actually, and I call this one Leadership Heroes. I'm hoping you've got an answer prepared, because I know you've listened to a few episodes before. Mm-hmm. So if you had to pick a person, any one person, they can be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that be and why?
I thought I'd answer this, and then I realised I don't think he's perfectly embodied leadership. He's more perfectly than anyone else I know, and it's a fictitious person, which might say something. And I don't know if you've had this or not on your podcast, certainly on the episodes I've heard. But when I was a young professional, let me say, I used to be really into the West Wing. And Jed Bartlett, who was the fictitious president in the West Wing, to me, was the best leader I've seen. And I think, so some of the things he did, I think particularly pertinent at the moment, was that he said sorry when he needed to, and he took responsibility. And I think there just seems an epidemic at the moment, not just in politics, about not saying sorry, or saying sorry in a way we don't mean, or not changing our... So I think sometimes you can change your mind for the right reasons, and you just need to own up and say, we talked about imperfect information before. Actually, we've now had new information. I've changed my mind on my decision. And people don't do that, and they go with a decision that's now not the right decision. And maybe that's because of the backlash they'll get in the public. I don't know. So he took responsibility. I think he was really good at understanding people, and he was just very wise. So there's something around understanding all the different bits of something and asking people's opinion, but then still making a decision. So we talked a lot about, communication and getting points of view from other people. The danger of doing that is that you end up not making a decision, or you try and get everyone happy, and you can't do that. So he had the right balance of decisiveness and consultation, I guess. And just the negotiations that he had to do, the American politics system fascinates me. I only know it through fictitious stuff. But just having to balance the needs of everyone. And he did that well, because he really understood where people were coming from. I think the thing that stopped me from thinking he was perfect was I remember that right at the end, I don't know if you watched it, West Wing. Yeah, at the end,
big fan.
He was diagnosed with it might have been ME or MS or something like that.
Yeah, MS.
And he decided to hide it from the American public because I think he was running for re-election. And in the end, he did come clean. But the transparency that he'd always showed, I felt, through his presidency kind of just fell away a little bit at the end there, probably because it kind of told you what was the most important thing to him, and that was about getting re-elected.
That's a funny one. So he would actually be on my list as well, because I have a short list in my head just in case somebody asks me in return, because that's happened a couple of times. So I know I'm always prepared. And he's on my list. And it's interesting because I rewatched it recently, and the bit about him having MS, because I'd remembered it initially the same way you have, but actually he'd had it from the beginning. And he'd never told the public. So even before he was president, he knew he had it. And then the reason he went public with it was because he wanted to go for re-election, and he felt finally the weight of guilt of the secret. He had to come clean. And I think that was kind of his biggest flaw as a leader, actually, was keeping that secret and being transparent. And
that's interesting, because I'd forgotten that bit, because I haven't watched it since I originally watched it.
Yeah, and it was a lot earlier in the series run as well than you might think. I think it was like the second or third series that came out.
Yeah. Because I think he'd done 2 complete terms, hadn't he, by the end?
Yes, yeah. But I think the other thing I really like about him as a leader is 2 things, actually, is he manages to have this kind of the wisdom that you're talking about, but also the depth of knowledge.
Yeah.
So he's obviously very intelligent, but no, not disparaging any intelligent people out there, but I find quite often intelligent people can get lazy in the detail, but he didn't. So he would go into the depth of subjects. He'd make sure he would go into a meeting and he would have read everything that was available to him. He would know everything as well as the expert in the room. And then the second thing I really liked about him was the courage of his convictions.
Yes.
So he would stick to his guns when it really mattered. And there's a couple of standout moments, like the one with the whole religious angle, and again, American politics. But I don't think I've ever seen or read about a real president doing that in the way that he did it.
No, not a real president. I think it's interesting because there's people that I would sometimes think are good leaders on this side of the pond, because you see them on TV and you think it sounds like they know what they're saying, and then you find out a little bit more about them, and they're not quite as good a leader as you thought. Whereas I guess the advantage we had with Jed Bartlett and anyone else on TV is you get to see the stuff behind the scenes, which we don't for most leaders in real life, certainly like public-facing ones.
That's true, which is probably why it's so horribly unfair to pick fictitious characters. But also, it's quite fun, so I'm never going to take it out.
I want to know who else is on your list now, but maybe we'll do that after.
Maybe. No, I've not had that one before. Anyway, so I'm going to have to take it off my list now. I can't use him. Thanks.
All right.
Well, Helen, it's been a great conversation. Thank you for your time. And last thing, if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you, what you do, how they could work with you, do you want to put them towards your website or anything else?
So my company is called Helen Tuddenham Consulting, and the website is just helentuddenhamconsulting.com. I'm glad for having quite an unusual surname, actually, because if you just type Helen Tuddenham into a search engine, you'll either find my LinkedIn profile on my website. So that's the easiest way of finding me, and all my contact details are on my website.
Excellent. And I'll put the links in the episode description as well, so people can find it even more easily. There we go.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again.
Thanks, David. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. It's been great. Thank you, Helen, for your time. I had fun there. I hope you did as well. Listeners, if you would like to learn more about Helen and what she does, I'll put the links in the episode description as usual, so you can click on those, get in touch with her, find out more, have a look at the website. If any of you listening are new managers, or if you are struggling with confidence, imposter syndrome, and just how to get the most from your team, and you would like to improve on your leadership confidence, your leadership knowledge, and develop your skills via a pretty informal and collegiate atmosphere with like-minded individuals and managers at a similar stage in their career, then the solution that I'm offering you to those problems is the Integrity Leaders Community Program. Head over to www.leadernotaboss.com. Again, link is in the episode description. So head over there, you can register. It's a very small fee with a 14-day free trial, so no obligation to pay anything at the end of that if you don't get anything valuable from it. And you can join us. You can get the benefit of a community atmosphere where we're all learning together, myself included, because I learn something new about leadership with every person I speak to. Get on board, don't miss your chance, and I hope to see you there very soon. That's all for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again next week when I'll be joined by another guest, Blake Hutchison. Blake will be talking to us about his experience in a number of different sectors, including his current business, which is a software and tech-driven marketplace for buying and selling businesses. So he's got some really interesting experience and some great lessons about leadership that he'll be sharing with us. So I hope you can join us then. Until then, remember, be a leader, not a boss.